Elon Musk floated an insane new plan to end the war in the most Elon Musk way possible via Twitter poll.
Political genius Elon Musk. In all seriousness, though, this tech businessman has been making waves recently with comments about Ukraine, Russia, and even China.
Why is Elon Musk involving himself in these affairs?
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Elon Musk has been in the news an awful lot lately, making all kinds of pronouncements from Russia and Ukraine to China and Taiwan and even the protests in Iran. Now, thanks to his Starlink satellites and enormous wealth, he's not just ranting into space. World leaders are actually responding to what he's been saying. And on today's program, we're going to be looking at whether or not his threats and promises have been helping or harming the chances of world peace.
One of our great geniuses, and we have to protect our genius.
If you had a movie and there was a guy who was like a hero in the movie who happened to be a billionaire, does wild like makes his own rockets and drills under the city, and
you wouldn't want to underestimate Elon. What he did at Tesla is amazing.
Elon's absolutely fixated on going to Mars.
We all know by now that Elon Musk is a businessman, an innovator, entrepreneur. He's the richest man in the world and has a quirky sense of humor, working towards world peace. But seriously, he is beginning to meddle in global geopolitics as if he were a world leader. And the question is he actually making things better or worse? Let's start where he's had the most influence, Russia and Ukraine. His Starlink satellite internet system, part of his SpaceX company, has allowed Ukraine to keep functioning even after Russia's massive attacks on the country's infrastructure. Ukraine calls Starlink critical to its war effort. But Houston, there's a problem. Earlier this month, Musk tweeted his Ukraine-Russia peace plan. Ukraine ought to accept Russia's annexation of Crimea and allow areas in the east to redo elections of annexed regions under UN supervision to decide if they want to join Russia or not. He even put his plan to his Twitter followers in a poll. This understandably upset the Ukrainians. One Ukrainian diplomat tweeted, "Musk should something off." Musk took offense and threatened to stop paying for Starlink, suggesting the Pentagon and Ukraine should foot the bill, which he estimated to be $20 million every month. To Ukraine's great relief, Musk quickly did a U-turn. "To hell with it," he tweeted. "Even though Starlink is still losing money and other companies are getting billions of taxpayer dollars, we'll just keep funding Ukraine government for free."
If you have time after the war, you're very welcome. I invite you.
Yes, that sounds good. Well, I look forward to visiting.
Over to Iran now, where massive anti-government protests have been going on for the better part of a month. Seeing that the Iranian government had cut off the internet in certain areas, America's top diplomat Anthony Blinken announced on Twitter he'd allow US internet companies to provide services to Iran. An enigmatic Musk simply responded, activating Starlink. Once the initial excitement died down, there were many articles on why Musk's promise meant very little in practice. Experts made it clear you can't just park a bunch of satellites 500 kilometers over Iran and beam down the internet. Any would-be user would have to have a special terminal, which includes a 50-centimeter satellite dish, which is shipped in a package the size of 2 pizza boxes, one on top of the other. Our final theatre of geopolitical tension, China and Taiwan. China considers the island to be part of its territory, whereas Taiwan considers itself to be independent from Beijing. This dispute is becoming more and more intense, and both sides regularly hold military exercises. The United States is formally committed to defending Taiwan, so this has the potential to get very serious very fast. Fortunately, Musk, whose biggest Tesla factory is in Shanghai, has a plan, which he shared with the Financial Times. My recommendation, he said, would be to figure out a special administrative zone for Taiwan that is reasonably palatable, probably won't make everyone happy, and it's possible, and I think probable, in fact, that they could have an arrangement that's more lenient than Hong Kong.
Taiwan's defense minister says the country's military will not buy any more Tesla vehicles.
Now, is Elon Musk making things better or worse on the world stage? In the realm of geopolitics, the answer depends on who you ask. But what about the realm of business? Well, if a recent BBC documentary is to be believed, Musk is more of an overgrown toddler than a visionary, and his success seems almost accidental. Musk fans say anyone offering that as an explanation for Musk's achievements must surely need their head examined. And who better to examine it than the world-famous clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson, who will give the last word.
Someone like Elon Musk, I mean, the hell do you make of someone like that? We made an electric car, which is basically impossible. And then he built a rocket that you could reuse, which was impossible. And then he put one of his cars on top of the rocket and he shot it up into space.
Well, a glowing reference from Jordan Peterson there, but what do our guests think of him? I'm joined by Andrij Dobriansky from the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, who's in New York. Dmitry Alperovitch, a cybersecurity expert, former Pentagon advisor and chairman of the Silverado Policy think tank. He's in Washington, D.C. From London, Marko Gasic, an international affairs analyst, formerly of the Serbian Information Center, and Cameron Khansarinia, a policy director for the National Union for Democracy in Iran. He too is in Washington. Thank you and welcome all four of you. Andrij, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of Elon Musk's proposed peace plan for Russia and Ukraine?
I think we should treat it with the same amount of seriousness we treat his endorsement of Kanye West, his various proposals to defend free speech by proposing that troll bots and propagandists have access to Twitter. He's clearly a person with an enormous amount of wealth and an enormous amount of ability to influence the rest of the world. However, what he is putting out, and if it's true that he's putting this out in concert with communicating with Putin directly, I think we should all treat this with the seriousness of his pronouncements about Kanye West. These are pronouncements, not in reality.
I don't know that it's been established that he's been in talks with Vladimir Putin. He's actually denied it. He said the last time he spoke to him was 18 months ago, and that was about space. But let's leave that there for a moment. Putin's spokesman, Peskov, he says it's very positive that someone like Musk is looking for a peaceful way out.
Well, if you're talking about space, and that should be his area of expertise, then when he makes radical pronouncements, when stating in the same context of talking about Crimea, he says that Russia has been cut off from the rest of the world. Just in the last 3 weeks, we've had two major cooperative launches with Roscosmos and NASA. This is not something that's been cut off. In fact, the second launch was a new agreement with the Russian Space Agency and the West. So if he's making these bold pronouncements on one side, reality constantly interferes with his interpretation of the facts on the ground.
Marko, what do you make of Elon Musk's proposed peace plan?
Well, first off, what I notice is that there's very few people who are able to get peace plans into the discussion at the moment, because anyone who does, and Musk is the latest victim, despite his wealth, anyone who suggests anything that resembles peace is immediately shooed away and accused of being a Putin puppet, and they attempt to shut him up. Well, what Elon Musk is doing is attempting to give airtime to the idea that we should not be going into a war in perpetuity, as the war party seems to be advocating. And there are too many people in Ukraine who are not worried about the destruction to their country, but are more keen on destroying and inflicting destruction on the Russian country, to look at the possibility of a peace settlement. Even if you don't agree with Musk's plans or suggestions, let it be a basis of discussion. Let both sides actually engage, not engage militarily. We seem to have a problem with peace at the moment, because the military-industrial complex in Washington and its tools are speaking the loudest, and through their 150 PR companies engaged on a worldwide basis, are blocking peace out.
And let me put that point to Dmitry Alperovitch. Dmitry, you advised the Pentagon, the US Department of Defense. Do you think there's any truth in what Marko Gasic is saying, which is basically the US military-industrial complex is begging for war?
No, that's nonsense, of course. The Ukrainians are the ones that want to keep fighting for their country, and they want to liberate the territory that they've lost to the Russians at least since February 23rd, if not all the way to 2014. So this is in Ukrainians' hands. The Biden administration has made it very, very clear that if there's going to be a settlement, a peace settlement here, it's up to the Ukrainians to figure out what they want to do in terms of negotiated outcome. And it's not up to America to decide what happens in Ukraine.
Can we move this across now to what's happening with Starlink? Okay, leave the peace plan aside, and let's move on to Starlink. Andrij, can I ask you, you said that Starlink has been invaluable to Ukraine's functioning whilst under attack from Russia, and indeed its military operations. Can you explain that a bit further?
I experienced it myself when I went to the country twice already since the beginning of the full onslaught in February. Regional administrators are able to maintain the functioning of their local metropolitan areas, as well as the fighters on the front line. They're able to communicate directly to their commanders as well. This is happening at a time when President Zelensky just announced this week that 30% of the nation's electricity supply has been cut off this year through Russian shelling. So, just this week, 30% has been lessened due to Russian shelling. So the technology of Starlink is invaluable. I also want to highlight the fact that a lot of these units have been funded, purchased by friendly governments as well as NGOs, people who are fundraising on the ground just to get this equipment over to the front line. So whatever the generosity of Musk in his mind is, a lot of individual funds have been raised and given to Starlink for this.
Marko, I know you support Elon Musk's proposed peace plan, but I wonder if, like Russia, you are resentful about the fact that he supplies Starlink internet access to Ukrainians. Let me just read to you what the former head of the Russian space agency had to say. He actually threatened Musk and accused him of supplying militants of the Nazi Azov battalion with military communication equipment, and claimed that Musk would be held accountable. A bit of a threat there. And Musk said, if I die under mysterious circumstances, it's been nice knowing you. What do you think, Marko? Has he played a helpful or unhelpful role supplying Starlink?
I think he had an attack of romanticism, like many people at the beginning of this conflict, thinking it was a kind of Spanish Civil War, a kind of heroic crusade of good against evil. The reality is this was an unnecessary war. It shouldn't have started and it shouldn't be continuing. The problem is that the military-industrial complex wants it to continue. It enables them to sell weapons in perpetuity to Europe. It enables them to sell LNG to Europe at 10 times the price it would otherwise be. It's a basis for the prosperity of the corporates and the poverty of the poor and impoverished in Ukraine and increasingly throughout Europe. I understand why he wanted to supply those things. He may be thinking that he perhaps shouldn't have, but given that Elon Musk is himself funded in a way, his prosperity is based on American military research, which has led to a lot of his innovations, it's hardly surprising that he's rowed back.
Are you saying that Musk should not be supplying Starlink to Ukraine?
I think that Starlink is somewhat irrelevant because the real military hardware is the military grade stuff that the US military have designed over a period of decades. The Starlink is the latest iteration. It's really a kind of a glorified internet service provider, which the Russians have probably cracked anyway.
Okay, let me put that point to Dmitry. Dmitry is one of the foremost people speaking about cybersecurity. Dmitry, first of all, is Starlink essentially an irrelevancy in Ukraine and Russia?
Oh, absolutely not. It is absolutely critical both for civilian communications in Ukraine, because the Russians have targeted telecommunications infrastructure, both through cyber means as well as kinetically by targeting through missile attacks and other air campaigns. And it is also absolutely critical to the military campaign. It is enabling the Ukrainians to do intelligence collection, surveillance, reconnaissance, artillery targeting in a way that they simply would not have been able to do without Starlink.
Can I ask you about something that Elon Musk has said? That Russia has made multiple signal jamming and hacking attempts on Starlink. Do you think that Russia has the capabilities of knocking out Starlink?
Well, if they do, they haven't been able to do so. There's no question that they've tried, but it's a very difficult system because it uses literally thousands of satellites orbiting the Earth. It is very difficult to jam it, and that's why it's been so invaluable to the Ukrainians.
Okay, we may call on your expertise a little later in the program when we talk about China's plan to knock out Starlink. In the meantime, Dmitry, I wanted to ask you about something because you were an advisor to the Pentagon. Elon Musk is saying that to supply Starlink to Ukraine costs something like $20 million a month, $80 million spent so far, perhaps by the end of the year, $100 million. And he has said that Ukraine and the Pentagon should really be paying for it. Even though he said he will now pay for it, he really thinks that it's down to Ukraine and the Pentagon. Do you think the Pentagon will eventually foot the bill or not?
I do. And honestly, Elon is completely right here. He is not a charity. SpaceX is not a charity. It is a private enterprise and one that is frankly losing money right now. And other defense contractors like Lockheed, Raytheon, and others are supplying weapons to Ukraine are not doing it out of their goodness of their heart. They're getting paid for it, and so should Elon. The real problem with the Starlink controversy that we've seen in the last couple of weeks is not related to payment. He absolutely should be paid, but it's related to coverage. And there's allegations from the Ukrainian side that I think are very credible that Elon is turning it off on the front lines. He's still enabling the service in the rest of Ukraine, but where the Ukrainians are launching counteroffensives, where Starlink is essential to their military campaign, it is getting turned off, presumably by SpaceX. And if that is indeed the case, that needs to stop. Yes, he should get paid, but Ukrainians should decide where the service is turned on within the internationally recognized borders of their country.
But why do you think he's doing that?
I can't get into Elon's head. Maybe he's doing that because he thinks that this can somehow stop the war and help his peace plan get enacted. But whatever the reason, and if he's indeed behind it, this needs to get resolved and resolved quickly because it is impacting the Ukrainian counteroffensive.
Let's switch over to what's happening in Iran now. Very large anti-government protests for the best part of a month. Cameron Khansarinia, why is the internet so important to protesters in Iran?
Well, much like the people of Ukraine are facing an onslaught from Putin's aggressive military campaign against them, the people of Iran are facing an onslaught of an aggressive military campaign against them by their own government. We're now entering the second month of pro-democracy, anti-Islamic Republic protests in hundreds of cities and every single province across Iran. And what the Islamic Republic has often done in previous anti-regime uprisings, we saw this most bloodily and most costly in November of 2019, in which in a period of fewer than 3 days, the regime slaughtered at least 1,500 prisoners, protesters, is shut off the internet. So very often, the Islamic Republic uses the internet as a means of limiting Iranian protesters' ability to do two things. The first is communicate with one another, and the second is communicate with the outside world. It's important for them to communicate with one another, obviously to organize and continue to be able to grow their protest movement. And secondly, important to be able to communicate with the outside world, to get images and videos of what's happening on the ground to the international press and to international authorities to pressure the regime to stop such a bloody crackdown and to indeed support the Iranian people in their democratic, what I think it's now fair to call revolution.
So you're saying that Elon Musk and his Starlink satellites can save lives in Iran. Let me ask you then, what was your reaction when Elon Musk tweeted, "Starlink activated"?
I think it inspired hope in so many millions of Iranians. Of course, we know that Mr. Musk is a billionaire businessman. I think he has a bit of a flair, and he may fancy himself a bit of a showman as well, and that's okay. Sometimes you need that to be successful in business. I think what will remain to be seen is how many of these terminals can be active inside Iran. I think the Iranian people certainly welcome
Right,
Mr.
wait a minute.
Musk's
So you're now talking about what all the experts have talked about, which is that Starlink activated doesn't mean anything unless there are terminals to receive it. Are there any terminals in Iran? How would you get them there if not?
Well, without compromising operational integrity, as you know, this would be deemed as a very significant threat to the Islamic Republic. When you have a regime like this that's afraid of its own people, first and foremost, offering them access to communication tools and the internet, first and foremost, is a significant threat. So I won't go into too many details, but leave it to say that there are ways to get these terminals and other means of communication devices inside Iran. The Iranian people faced a similar problem roughly 2 decades ago when the Islamic Republic was banning satellite dishes from coming into the country. And indeed, at the time, they would fly helicopters over apartment buildings to see which apartment units were using these satellite dishes. But now the country, there's probably more than one in every single home. So as the number of these grow inside the country, the regime will be very able to do very little to confront it. There are ways to get them inside.
These ways, presumably you're talking about smuggling them. Are you in a position to tell us how long it will be until these terminals are up and running?
I believe there are lots of things already in progress. Again, without giving away too many details, I think that Iranians have seen what happened in Ukraine and how much this was a source of assistance to a people fighting off a foreign invader. And Iranians view the Islamic Republic as an internal invader, as really an occupying force. So I have confidence that there are a lot of efforts going on, some of which that we have firsthand knowledge of. And these are happening as we speak.
Dmitry, is it possible to estimate from where you are in Washington, D.C., if this is possible to get these terminals into Iran? And if so, in what sort of time frame?
It's hard to say. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of smuggling going into Iran. So I'm sure some of the Starlink terminals are getting in. It's a big question of whether they're getting to the right people or not, but at least some are likely in country.
Dmitry, as I mentioned, China has said very, very clearly, as much as they love Elon Musk and his plan for Taiwan and China, they are very much against him putting Starlink internet into China. Can you tell us why that would be?
Well, of course, the Chinese are all about control of the internet. They've been focused on that for several decades now, and they don't want to allow any telecommunications provider, particularly an American one, that would go in that would potentially impede their ability to control the content that the Chinese people see every day.
Yeah, the Chinese space officials have said they're looking at either soft ways or hard ways of knocking Starlink out when they need to. First of all, soft and hard ways of knocking out the constellation of Starlink satellites. What does that mean?
Well, it might mean technical measures like jamming of frequencies that Starlink uses within China, or it might mean actual arrests of people that are found to be using Starlink receivers, because even if they can't jam all the connections, they're likely able to identify them within the country and locate the people that might be using those terminals.
Yeah. When you look at his relationship with China, generally it's been quite a cozy one. He's been given an easy ride from around about 2010 or so to break into the electric vehicle market. His sales there have reached a record, and they were very, very praising of him when he said that, you know what, Taiwan could be like a bit like Hong Kong. It could be an administrative zone of China. Are you happy? Are you satisfied, as someone who used to advise the Department of Defense and who now advocates for the power of America in the world? Are you satisfied with that cozy relationship? Are you worried about it in any way?
I am worried about it, and I can tell you who is more worried about it is the Taiwanese. I've had conversations with members of the Taiwanese government on this issue. They are very concerned about their ability in the case of an invasion or even a blockade by China to actually have communications with the outside world, because a lot of their communications currently are dependent on undersea cables that are coming into the island. Those cables could get cut by the Chinese in the first hours of the conflict, and then the only thing that would be left would be satellite communications and shortwave radio. And a lot of that could be jammed, and if they're going to be relying on Starlink, they're not going to be assured that the service will continue, as we're seeing currently in Ukraine.
He has over 100 million followers on Twitter, and indeed, it looks like he's going to buy the platform. Does he have the power to change American public opinion on America's obligations to protect Taiwan? And if he is able to change American public opinion, will that then lead to a change of American policy towards Taiwan?
I don't think he has the power to change public opinion on this issue. And we have to remember that a tiny minority of the public actually is on Twitter within the United States. So while it is an influential platform, for sure, it is not the way that most Americans get their news. And frankly, the biggest problem here is that the Biden administration, while the president has talked on at least 4 occasions now that he will send American troops to fight for Taiwan, he has not explained to the American people why. What is the difference between Ukraine and Taiwan? Why fight in one case and not another? I think there's a case to be made for it, but the administration simply has not made it.
Cameron, just a final question. When you look at Elon Musk, he's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't he? I mean, it really depends on how this capricious billionaire falls down, on which side of the issue he may be in your favor or against you. Are you comfortable with him having that much power outside of business and in the world of geopolitics?
Well, I think that, like most things, that we have to see what happens in action. I think that when it comes to what he is most known for in this realm, when it comes to opposing authoritarian dictatorships, be they the authoritarian dictatorship trying to squash freedom in Ukraine, be it the Chinese Communist Party trying to squash freedom in Taiwan, in its own country of China, be it the Islamic Republic. Elon has stepped up more than other leaders in the business community. We have to see how it works in practice. But I think what's clear is he's done more than many in the business community to take on this new axis of evil, which runs from Moscow to Tehran to Beijing. And I hope other business leaders will follow. Of course, governments like the U.S. government have to ensure there are proper regulations and controls in place. But I hope others in the business community will follow his lead.
Well, thank you for that. We have run out of time, but thank you all four of you for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.